There are moments in life when God invites you into a secret place, a place where you speak not to the world, not to people, not to your circumstances, but straight to his heart. And there, in that private chamber of spiritual intimacy, something begins to shift, not because the world hears you, but because heaven does. There is a prayer you are about to speak, a simple declaration, a short moment of surrender, barely 23 seconds. But if you say it with sincerity, humility, and expectation, something will begin to rearrange inside you. A quiet confidence will awaken, a fresh peace will settle, a gentle assurance will rise, telling you you are not alone. God is working. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to broadcast it. You don't need to explain it. Some prayers are strongest when they remain hidden, whispered only between your spirit and God's spirit. There are blessings that move faster when you let silence protect them. There are answers that come not because you shouted, but because you believed quietly. The greatest miracles often begin in the unseen. God speaks in stillness. God moves in moments that others overlook. God responds to hearts that don't pray to impress, but pray to connect. And when you whisper this prayer, you are stepping into that sacred alignment. You are saying, God, I trust you more than I trust the noise around me. Maybe you've been carrying worry. Maybe your heart has been heavy. Maybe you've been fighting battles in silence. Maybe people don't even know the weight you're holding. But God does. He sees the thoughts you don't speak. He sees the tears you hide. He sees the fatigue behind your smile. And he is not ignoring you. He is drawing you closer, preparing you for what he has already arranged. There are doors you've been knocking on, opportunities you've been hoping for, answers you've been waiting on. You may feel stuck, delayed, or forgotten. But listen, God often prepares the biggest shifts silently before revealing them suddenly. Your situation can change in a single moment. What was closed can open. What was heavy can lift. What was unclear can become clear. Sometimes all heaven is waiting for is your willingness to pause and say, God, I place this in your hands. Don't underestimate what a short, sincere prayer can do. It aligns your thoughts. It stabilizes your emotions. It centers your heart. It quiets fear. It awakens courage. And most importantly, it reconnects you to the source of every breakthrough you will ever experience. When you pray, don't think of how big the problem is. Think of how big your God is. When you pray, don't focus on how slow things feel. Focus on how quickly God can turn them around. When you pray, don't imagine defeat. Imagine the doors God is able to unlock. Imagine the peace he can restore. Imagine the strength he can pour into you. Imagine the guidance, the clarity, the inner shift that begins the moment you surrender the burden you were never meant to carry alone. Speak this prayer with quiet confidence. Speak it with expectation. Don't tell anyone, not because it's a secret formula, but because some spiritual moments are too precious to expose to the noise of opinions, doubt, or misunderstanding. Let this moment remain between you and God. Let it be your sacred offering, your private seed, your quiet act of faith. And once you've spoken it, don't worry, don't overthink, don't analyze. Just breathe, rest, walk in peace. Trust that something is moving, even if you can't see it yet. Sometimes the biggest result in 24 hours is not the change around you, but the change within you. And when the inside shifts, the outside eventually follows. Speak this prayer for 23 seconds. Not as magic, not as ritual, but as connection, as surrender, as alignment, as the moment you let God take the weight you've been carrying, the moment your heart says, I trust you, I give this to you, lead me, guide me, strengthen me. Because when your heart shifts, your life shifts. When your belief rises, your atmosphere rises. When your spirit aligns, your path aligns. And when you release the burden, God releases the strength, the clarity, the peace, and the direction you've been needing. Speak it quietly. Speak it sincerely. Speak it privately. And then watch how God begins to calm your heart, strengthen your spirit, and guide your steps. One moment, one thought, one breath at a time. There is something profoundly powerful about a short, sincere prayer spoken from the depth of your heart. People often believe that only long, complex prayers move heaven, that they need perfect wording, poetic expression, or extended hours on their knees for God to respond. But the truth is far simpler, far more intimate, and far more beautiful. God listens not to the length of the prayer, but to the weight of the heart behind it. A 23-second prayer, whispered in sincerity, can carry more impact than an hour of empty routine. When a person speaks from the core of their soul, even if it lasts only a few seconds, that moment becomes a spiritual connection powerful enough to shift their atmosphere. A short prayer becomes powerful because it captures pure faith without the distractions. There is no performance, no pressure to say the right words, no need to impress anyone, not even yourself. It is just you and God. It is your breath touching His presence. It is your heart leaning in. In those few seconds, every layer of worry, fear, and noise falls away, and what remains is the raw cry of your spirit. God responds to that. Heaven notices that. The universe shifts when the spirit aligns with its creator. A short prayer forces you into simplicity, and simplicity is where sincerity is born. The words might be few, but they carry honesty. They carry emotion. They carry the truth of what you genuinely feel. When you speak a sincere prayer, even briefly, you open a channel between your earthly struggle and God's divine strength. You create a bridge between your human limitations and His supernatural ability. And once that bridge is built, even if it takes only 23 seconds to form, spiritual energy begins to flow. This kind of prayer is not rushed. It is purposeful. It may be short in duration but long in depth. It may be simple in wording but heavy with meaning. You don't need to explain everything to God. He already knows. You don't need to describe every detail. He already sees. You don't need to convince Him of your need. He already cares. What God waits for is your heart's opening. A short prayer creates that opening instantly. It is like cracking a window and letting fresh air rush in. It is the moment light enters a dark room. Some of the most life-changing prayers in history were short. A single sentence whispered by a hurting soul, a few words spoken by someone in desperation, a brief plea from someone who had no more strength to continue. And yet, heaven responded. A prayer does not gain power from length. It gains power from alignment, from intent, from connection. When your soul is aligned with God for even a moment, extraordinary things begin to move. A 23-second prayer also works because it removes every excuse. You don't need to wait for the right place, the right atmosphere, the right mindset, the right time of day. You can pray in your room, in your car, in the kitchen, during work, or even in silence. You can pray while standing, sitting, walking, lying down, or simply breathing deeply. God does not require a ritual. He requires your heart. He requires your willingness. He requires the opening of your spirit. Sometimes the most powerful prayers come in moments when you have no strength for long expressions, when you are overwhelmed, tired, lost, or confused, when your emotions are heavy and your thoughts scattered, when you feel like you can barely speak. In those moments, a short prayer becomes a lifeline. A whisper becomes a rope pulling you out of the darkness. A few seconds of surrender becomes enough for God to lift you. God is not moved by eloquence. He is moved by authenticity. He is moved by humility. He is moved by faith. Even a mustard seed of faith, expressed in a single breath, can move mountains. The simplicity of a short prayer reveals your trust. You are not relying on the prayer itself. You are relying on God. You are not depending on your own strength. You are depending on His. In those 23 seconds, you are saying, I cannot do this alone. I need you. And God responds with compassion and power. A short prayer works because it removes the temptation to overthink. Many people talk themselves out of prayer. They feel unworthy, uncertain, or unsure what to say. But when you realize that you don't need to say much, just a few sincere words, you remove the mental barriers, you silence the doubts, you quiet the inner critic, and you speak from your heart rather than your mind. That is when prayer becomes real. That is when it becomes powerful. In those brief 23 seconds, you are stepping into the presence of the one who has no limitations, the one who holds your future, the one who understands your past, the one who walks with you in your present, the one who can turn your fear into courage, your confusion into clarity, and your heaviness into peace. A short prayer creates a moment for God to enter your situation and begin working in ways you cannot yet see. A short, sincere prayer is not just words, it is spiritual alignment. It is the moment when your earthly voice touches heavenly power, when your humility invites divine intervention, when your vulnerability opens the door for strength, when your whisper rises like a signal to heaven saying, "Here I am, I'm open, I'm listening, I'm trusting." And that moment, though brief, carries the potential to transform everything. There are certain moments in life when silence becomes your greatest spiritual shield, not because you are hiding something out of fear, but because you are protecting something sacred. Some prayers are not meant to be spoken aloud to others. Some spiritual seeds are not meant to be exposed to the noise of opinion, doubt, or misunderstanding. There are blessings that God accelerates when they are kept in the quiet spaces of your heart. Not everything needs to be announced. Not everything needs to be shared. Some things grow better when they grow secretly. A silent prayer carries a different kind of power. It is wrapped in purity, sheltered from interference, protected from negativity, and shielded from the spiritual resistance that often comes with public declaration. When something is precious, you guard it. When something is holy, you keep it close. When something is delicate, you don't hand it to everyone. A silent prayer is like a delicate seed planted deep in the soil. It does its greatest work where no one can see it. If you expose it too early, you risk damaging what God is developing. There are times when God whispers something to your heart that is meant only for you. He gives you a vision, a hope, a promise, a sense of direction that is fragile in its early stages. If you share it prematurely, the doubts of others can weaken your confidence. The disbelief of others can cloud your clarity. The negativity of others can contaminate the purity of what God is cultivating. Silence protects what God is preparing. When you keep a prayer between you and God, you eliminate the interference of human opinions. No one can question what they don't know. No one can discourage what they cannot see. No one can speak fear into a prayer they never heard. Silence becomes a spiritual firewall. It becomes a boundary that shields your faith from unnecessary battles. Not every spiritual moment needs an audience. Some breakthroughs begin in quiet places because quiet places are where your heart becomes most aligned with God. A silent prayer is powerful because it is unpolluted by the need to impress. When you speak privately to God, you aren't trying to sound holy. You are not trying to earn approval. You are not trying to be impressive. You are simply being honest. God responds to that raw honesty. He responds to the truth beneath your words. A prayer that is protected from human ears becomes more direct, more intimate, and more focused. It goes straight to God without detouring through people. There is also a spiritual wisdom in knowing that not everyone can handle what God is doing in your life. Some people interpret your prayer through their own limitations. If they don't believe something is possible for themselves, they will not believe it is possible for you. If they are trapped in fear, they will project that fear onto you. If they lack faith, they will unintentionally weaken yours. This is why certain prayers must remain quiet, because silence preserves the strength of your expectation. Keeping your prayer private does not make it less powerful. It makes it more protected. When you pray silently, you create a sacred space where your spirit and God's spirit can meet without interference. That is where clarity comes. That is where peace grows. That is where courage rises. Silence becomes a spiritual sanctuary where your faith is strengthened before it ever faces the world. There is also a divine principle at work. Hidden prayers often produce visible answers. What you do quietly before God, He rewards openly in His timing. His pattern throughout history has been to work in secret before revealing His work in public. Seeds grow underground before they sprout. Babies form in the womb before they are born. Vision develops in the heart before it manifests in your hands. God honors the hidden because the hidden demonstrates trust. A silent prayer also prevents you from speaking too quickly about what God is not finished building yet. If you share something too early, you can sabotage what God is still shaping. People may question it, they may criticize it, they may mock it, they may misunderstand it, and suddenly your mind becomes clouded by opinions that were never meant to influence your journey. Silence keeps your focus clear. It keeps your faith steady. It keeps your spirit anchored. When a prayer is kept private, it becomes a sacred pact between you and God. It becomes a symbol of trust. You are saying, God, I don't need applause. I don't need validation. I don't need others to agree with me. This is between you and me. And when God sees that kind of trust, He responds with favor. He honors the faith that seeks no audience and demands no approval. Not telling anyone also helps you avoid the temptation of spiritual pride. Instead of turning your prayer into a performance or a public display, you keep it grounded, you keep it pure, you keep it humble. And humility attracts grace. Humility draws God's attention. Humility strengthens your spirit. In silence, you learn to hear God's whisper. In silence, you learn to recognize His voice. In silence, you build the kind of faith that does not crumble when the world becomes loud. Silent prayers are not weak. They are powerful because they are protected. They are not small. They are sacred. They are not hidden from God. They are hidden in God. And sometimes the fastest answers come to the prayers nobody knows about, the prayers that weren't announced, the prayers that were whispered, the prayers that stayed tucked inside your heart where only God could hear them. There is something profoundly transformative that happens when you release your burden into God's hands. Many people pray because they want their circumstances to change immediately, but they overlook the deeper truth. God often changes the heart before He changes the situation. The moment you speak a sincere prayer, even if it lasts only a few seconds, God begins working on the inner world of your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and expectations. Long before anything shifts on the outside, something begins to shift on the inside, and that internal transformation becomes the birthplace of the breakthrough you desire. You may not feel the change instantly. It may not shake your room or bring angels visible before your eyes, but something subtle, powerful, and spiritual begins to move beneath the surface. It starts as a calming of the storm inside you, a lifting of the heaviness, a quiet confidence that begins to rise in your chest, a sense that you are not fighting alone anymore. That moment of surrender tells heaven, I trust you, and trust is the language God responds to. When the heart changes, everything changes. When you release your burden, you release control. You release fear. You release the stress of having to fix everything by your own strength. You release the anxiety of trying to predict every outcome. You release the weight you were never meant to carry. And when you let go, peace enters. When peace enters, clarity enters. And when clarity enters, direction becomes easier. Suddenly, what felt complicated becomes simple. What felt confusing becomes manageable. What felt overwhelming becomes lighter, not because the circumstance is different, but because you are different. Sometimes you don't even realize how much pressure you have been living under until the moment you let it go. You don't realize how much tension has built up in your mind, how much fear has been sitting in your chest, how much worry has been shaping your decisions. As soon as you surrender the burden, you feel a shift. Even if the situation outside remains the same, the grip it had on your heart begins to loosen. God knows that real breakthroughs start internally. You can change your environment, but if your mind is still troubled, peace will not stay. You can receive a blessing, but if your heart is anxious, you will not enjoy it. You can step into a new season, but if your thoughts remain fearful, you will drag old limitations into a new beginning. This is why God works inside first. He strengthens you before He shifts things around you. He aligns your heart so that when the external blessing comes, you are ready to carry it. The result of a sincere prayer is often an internal rearranging of thoughts. God begins to expose what is unhealthy. He highlights the fears that shouldn't control you. He reveals the lies that were shaping your self-doubt. He identifies the places where your hope was leaking, and in that silent inner work, your heart becomes anchored. You begin imagining possibilities instead of problems. You begin expecting good instead of bracing for disappointment. You begin sensing hope where you once felt heaviness. This inner shift softens the ground of your spirit so that the external blessing can take root. When you release your burden to God, you are also making room for divine intervention. You empty your hands so that God can fill them. You free your mind so that God can guide it. You loosen your grip so that God can take control. There is no greater act of faith than letting go, because letting go means you trust the unseen more than what you see. Letting go means you trust God's timing more than your deadlines. Letting go means you trust His wisdom more than your worries. This internal transformation becomes the first sign that God has begun His work. It might show up as a sudden moment where your heart feels lighter for no logical reason. It might appear as an unexpected sense of peace while your situation is still unresolved. It might show up as a new strength where you previously felt drained. It might feel like clarity gently settling over your mind, giving you understanding where confusion once lived. These are not small things. They are supernatural indicators that your prayer has been heard. As your heart changes, your decisions begin to change. You start responding differently. You become more patient, more confident, more discerning, more hopeful. You make choices not from fear, but from faith. You walk with a quiet strength that others may not understand. You carry yourself with a calm that makes no sense to those who only look at circumstances. This inner transformation becomes a magnet for breakthrough, because when your inner world aligns with faith, the outer world eventually reflects that alignment. Your perspective shifts as well. You stop seeing your situation as an impossible wall and start seeing it as an opportunity for God to reveal His power. You stop seeing delays as rejection and start seeing them as preparation. You stop seeing closed doors as failures and start seeing them as protection. This shift is spiritual maturity, and it grows every time you release your burden instead of holding onto it. This is why even a small prayer can trigger big internal change. It is not the length of the prayer that matters. It is the surrender inside the prayer. Once you say, "God, I place this in your hands," the spiritual atmosphere around you begins to shift, not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it. Peace becomes your anchor. Wisdom becomes your guide. Faith becomes your fuel. And before you ever see a visible change, you feel an invisible one, the kind that tells you God is moving, even if the world hasn't caught up yet. My friends, as we come to the end of this message, remember this: heaven responds to sincerity, not length. God is not moved by complicated words or long rituals. He is moved by a heart that trusts him. When you speak a simple 23-second prayer from the depths of your spirit, you activate a divine chain reaction that begins long before you see results with your physical eyes. Something begins to shift inside you, something begins to rise around you, and something begins to open for you in the realm you cannot see. Your burden was never meant to be carried alone. Your fear was never meant to rule you. Your uncertainty was never meant to suffocate your future. God has already prepared answers, alignments, solutions, breakthroughs, and divine surprises that will unfold at the right time. And your small prayer, whispered in faith, is the key that unlocks the timing of heaven. So walk with confidence. Walk with quiet boldness. Walk with the assurance that you have placed your life, your needs, and your desires into the hands of the one who never fails. You may not see the full story yet, but the author is already writing the next chapter. You may not feel the full breakthrough yet, but the seed has already been planted. You may not understand the process, but the result is already prepared. Hold on to that stillness you feel in your spirit. Guard that peace. Protect that faith, because when peace enters your heart, victory begins its journey toward you. What you prayed for in 23 seconds is already in motion. What you release to God is already being handled. And what God has planned for you will not be stopped by people, by circumstances, by delays, or even by the limits you once placed on yourself. Get ready, because the next 24 hours may surprise you. Not because of magic, but because of faith. Not because of chance, but because of divine timing. And not because of your strength, but because you dared to believe that God hears even the smallest cry of the heart. Stand firm, stay expectant, your answer is on the way.